There's been a lot of publications lately about the new diabetes drugs, especially the new indication for teenagers and children, which has been based on quite short-term science, but that's for a weekly message. But I want to talk about diabetes type 2. How is it that when I say that people understand that diabetes type 2 is a metabolic disease that is very closely linked to nutrition, and people know that the most effective medication for diabetes type 2 is good nutrition, and yet many people who are at high risk, like women who had diabetes when they were pregnant, or if they have diabetes in the family, or they belong to an ethnic group that has a high risk for diabetes, and they know that they have high risk, they develop diabetes type 2 anyway. And how is it that people who have diabetes type 2, even when they get medication, many times the disease continues to develop and continues to get worse, and they have to get another medication and another medication, even with these new medications, and eventually many of them end up having to inject insulin. So how is it that we know that nutrition is an integral part of it, and yet people are not really able to stop this disease in its tracks? I think from the research that I have done and my own clinical experience, there's two basic reasons. The first reason is because many people eat foods that spike in sugar and insulin, and they don't even know it. They think they're eating something healthy, and they're not. The second reason is sugar addiction. So let's talk about these two reasons and unpack them. First of all, let's talk about processed foods and talk about the fact that many people think they're eating healthy when they're really not. We do not eat the same food that our ancestors ate 150 years ago until like 10,000 years ago. Let's talk about when, humans started cultivating food. We do not eat in the last 150 years since the technology revolution and industrialized food. We do not eat the same food. Even the things that are considered normal part of the meals, when they're processed, well, it really changes the way the food is metabolized in our body. But even worse than that, people don't read the food labels of the things that they buy. And many of the processed products that are sold on the shelves of supermarkets have hidden sugars and starches in them, or have seed oils that promote inflammation. What the food industry doesn't have to tell us, maybe they have to tell us what they put in, but even that, they know how to do a lot of manipulations to keep a lot of things under the radar. And maybe they have to tell us how much, but they don't have to tell us what they did to that food. And many times that has a huge influence on how we metabolize that food and what it does to our body, and whether it keeps us metabolically healthy or makes us metabolically sicker. So, and then even then, people don't even read the label. So there's a lot of hidden sugars and starches and things like that in our foods that are making us sick. And people don't realize it. They think they're just eating like a regular healthy meal, and they're really not. So the solution to that thing is to eat real food, to really go back to eating as much as possible the way our ancestors ate 150 years ago or even before that. Now, if you ask me, it doesn't matter if you think that is more plant-based or more animal protein-based. I do think that people who are at high risk for diabetes type 2, or for people especially with diabetes type 2, more and more research is coming out that a low carb way of eating is good for them. But I know plenty of people who went vegan and they had diabetes type 2 and they were able to stop the disease in its tracks. The point is to eat real food. The point is to eat food that keeps you metabolically safe, metabolically healthy. And you know what? In today's world, that's no small feat, because even things that people ate 150 years ago, the same things like bread. Give a perfect example is bread. People ate bread 150 years ago, but you know what? It wasn't the same bread. Even if they ate whole wheat bread then and you're eating whole wheat bread today, it's not even the same whole wheat bread. The wheat then is not the same wheat. The wheat today has been genetically modified and it's higher in starches. The flour that was milled in a different way. It was much coarser so that the high fiber of those wheat, of that flour that what bread was made out of was much more intact. Today, flour, well, it's this very, very fine powder that's been pulverized. When you do that to the fiber isn't as effective at stopping and slowing the carbohydrate absorption in the body. Here, perfect example. Another good example of things that are considered natural is fruit. Fruit 150 years ago was smaller, wasn't as sweet, and was local and was seasonal. So people ate much less fruit than people do today. But today, you can eat as much fruit as you want, right? Any fruits that you want, any time that you want, and they're very big, but they do contain sugar. So people are eating today a lot more sugar and foods that advance diabetes, whether you're at risk or you've already been diagnosed with it. It advances the disease even more, even though you think you're eating healthy. People think they're eating healthy and they're actually eating foods or too much of foods that can really make their metabolic health even worse and advance these diseases. So that's the first reason, is our food supply has really been hijacked by the food industry. And I don't think we need to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We need the food industry to feed 9 billion people in the world or whatever it is, our food population. But it's really today, you have to be super careful about what you eat and know to eat real food and to avoid processed foods as much as possible. And if you do buy something with a label, well, you better read the small print there and learn what it says. Learn the different names for sugars and starches and the different ways of processing foods. And I always say, you know what? If it's too good to be true, you're probably right. So that's about processed foods and eating real food. But then we have the second reason, which is sugar addiction. Sugar addiction is a huge problem because what happens is even people who know and want to eat real food and know how to read a food label and know and really want to eat those foods that will keep them metabolically healthy find it an impossible task to do so because of these cravings that just hijack the brain and overtake willpower and self-discipline and knowledge. And somebody who is addicted to sugar and ultra-processed foods today, it's like somebody in the 40s who found out that smoking is addictive and also causes lung cancer and tried to quit. Because in the 40s, for example, doctors were recommending that you smoke in moderation, of course, but it's okay to smoke. It focuses your thinking and relaxes you. If people who were at work, when they would go to a meeting, there would be cigarettes on the table and ashtrays and lighters, and everybody would be smoking away. And you could smoke on the bus, you could smoke on the airplane, you could smoke in restaurants. Everybody was smoking everywhere all the time. Pregnant women were smoking, and everybody was smoking. And somebody who would try to quit smoking there, I'm sure, it was much harder than it is today. Because it was an acceptable thing. It was advertised 24/7 on billboards, in magazines, on television commercials, everywhere. So, of course, if somebody is being 24/7 stimulated to smoke and they're trying to quit smoking, that's much harder. And today, instead of having the cigarettes on the table at the business meetings, it's the croissants and the danishes and the pretzels and whatever it is that's there. So all these addictive and harmful foods, the Coca-Cola is no less harmful than Marlboro cigarettes, but they're still being the culture today is still being developed to, it should be the most acceptable thing, the cheapest thing, the most available thing, and the most aggressively marketed things, including to teenagers and children. So no wonder that teenagers and children are developing diabetes type 2, even if they go to a dietitian who says to them, eat more vegetables. So if this is something that causes addiction, but yet we're living in a society and an environment that is so promoting this addiction and advancing this addiction and making it so hard to quit sugar and ultra processed foods. And of course, people think anybody who quits completely or completely abstains from sugar or ultra processed foods, it's like not healthy to eat only healthy food. It's considered like something too extreme, or that you're denying yourself or restricting or whatever it is. But for many people, actually the easiest solution is to abstain, to just quit, like with cigarettes. But it's very hard to do that in today's society, in today's nutritional environment. That really isn't easy. And then my recommendation would be to get help. That is why I have created my sugar-free recovery program, to help people to do that, to navigate our obesogenic environment today. So if we talked about, just to recap, if we talked about the two main reasons, if you ask me, two of the main reasons why people at risk for diabetes type 2 diabetes, and people who have already been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, their disease continues to develop, right? Or either they go from high risk to diabetes, type 2 diabetes, or their type 2 diabetes continues to develop even with all the new medications and whatever it is. It's because of the nutrition. It's because people either are eating foods that make the disease get worse without knowing it, or they have an addiction and they can't stop even when they want to, because that's what happens with addiction. So the first one would be eat real food. Eat as much real food as you can. Know how to read a food label. Know how to at least guesstimate what the food company has done to processed foods before you buy them. And if you really want to have that in you, right? Things high in sugar, starches, seed oils, or that have been highly processed and have a lot of ingredients that you don't know what they are. Just go back to eating the way people ate 150 years ago. And you can, because my main message to you is type 2 diabetes is not some inevitable thing that happens to people even who are at high risk, or it's a part of old age. It used to be a rare disease when we didn't have these foods around. And certainly you never saw it in teenagers and children. And now we're talking about giving medication to children and teenagers because the prevalence of type 2 diabetes is so high in children and teenagers, which is like something's wrong if we're focusing on the medications instead of on our food environment and the food supply. Truly. So the first thing is just eat real food. But the second thing is, if you know that and you want to do that, but you can't because of cravings, and you feel like you're addicted to sugar and ultra-processed foods the same way a heavy smoker is addicted to cigarettes, well, get help. Get help in quitting these addictive foods, in really learning to get free of the addiction. It is not an easy task. Research shows that people who quit smoking do it on average 7 times they quit before they actually get to stop smoking for good. So even if you have tried certain programs and they haven't worked, it doesn't mean that you're hopeless. It doesn't mean that you are, doomed to obesity or God forbid, metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes. It means that you need to try again. Maybe you need to find another program that does work for you. Don't give up. Keep going. And if you would like to find out about my sugar-free recovery program, well, you can click in the link below and check out my website and leave me a message, and we can have a free complimentary call where I can see how I can help you. Thank you very, very much for joining this week's ZIPPI'S Weekly Message. I'm a nurse and certified food addiction counselor, and we'll see you next week on Mondays. Bye-bye.